Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 501st episode, we have a bunch of news, including a really cool new ceratopsian called Lokiceratops. It was picked up by a lot of more general media, so you may have already even heard about it.
We also have a number of news items about the dinosaur extinction, as well as dinosaur lifespan. So, turns out there might have been more than meets the eye when it came to the non-avian dinosaurs going extinct. Like the stage may have been set with volcanic winters, and things as small as dust may have played a larger role than we realized.
Okay, that sounds like it's building on some stuff we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm. We've also got Dinosaur of the Day, Pampadromaeus, which is one of the earliest dinosaurs.
Nice.
So the far end of the extinction timeline.
Yeah,
for
the
dinosaurs,
very beginning to the very end.
And I've got the fun fact this week. It's that mammals, including us humans, may have shorter lifespans because of the non-avian dinosaurs.
That's not cool.
Yeah.
I also like how maybe, does this relate to how we only have 2 sets of teeth? Or is that a different thing?
That's a different thing.
Yeah. I think I blame dinosaurs for that too, though. But before we get into all of that stuff, we want to thank our patrons for helping to make our podcast a reality. And we have 4 new patrons to thank this week. The first one is Big Sheep, which is actually an upgrade. They've been a patron for a while, but just bumped up to the Triceratops level. So they're getting a shout out for the first time. Thank you very much, Big Sheep. And then we also have 3 other new patrons. Daspletosaurus horneri, also a very good dinosaur. Kelly, and Ryan the biochemist, who has sent us some questions we've talked about before. So thank you all for joining. And then rounding out our shoutouts, we've got Pamela, Shane Kylosaurus, TRX Dinosaurs, Will, Rocco Raptor, and Chris.
Yes, thank you so much. It's so cool to see our community growing and all the engagement that we've been getting. And just, thank you so much for being a part of it.
We also have a quick announcement to make, which involves our Patreon, and that's what we have a trivia game coming up. So starting next week, we're going to start this series. The idea is that dinosaurs are showing up in the modern world in all sorts of crazy places, and nobody knows why, but the only people that can help are people that know a ton about dinosaurs, because what do you do when a dinosaur is acting crazy? You have to know something about that dinosaur and maybe what you could do to calm it down, or how you could get involved to help these dinosaurs and these people, which are suddenly thrust together after never seeing each other in all of history. So it's going to have all sorts of interesting situations. And the way it's going to work is that every week we're going to have 2 questions. We'll have 1 question for everybody in the audience, and we'll give a link, and then you can fill out a form to enter to win. And we'll have a second question for our patrons. And the thing that you'll be winning is a big prize package that we've put together.
We'll be announcing what exactly is in the prize package soon, but for now, just know that it's a lot of dynamite goodies.
Yep. And of course, you'll get bragging rights. We'll do a big celebration for whoever wins on the show.
So yes, it'll be open to everybody. And then if you are a patron, you'll have extra chances to answer trivia questions.
Yep. And extra chances to win as a result. So jumping into the news, kicking it off with Lokiceratops, a really cool new ceratopsian you may have already heard of. Meaning in addition to when I introed it 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, there were a lot of headlines about this one.
Yeah, in places I don't think I've ever seen dinosaur news before, like CNN and ABC and things.
It's a cool find, and it's got a great name.
It does, yeah. I think the name might have a lot to do with it. It also came with some good paleo art. I think a good name and good paleo art is like 80% of the battle in getting a lot of press coverage for your dinosaur.
Remember that if you're naming a dinosaur.
Yeah. Especially the paleo art part, because it helps to have a picture to go with it. But this new dinosaur was published in Pure J, and the article was written by Mark Lowen and a whole host of other co-authors. And again, it is named Lokiceratops. It's a centrosaurine ceratopsian, and centrosaurines are the dinosaurs with horns and frills that are often known for having a long horn on their nose and then shorter horns by their eyes. So sort of the reverse of Triceratops, which has the larger horns by the eyes and the shorter one by the nose. But Lokiceratops is another in the growing number of centrosaurines that don't match that description at all.
Wonder if that description's going to need to be updated soon.
I think so. And these authors actually did use a different definition for centrosaurines. But I was wondering if maybe the reason why they named it Loki might have to do with the fact that it's a centrosaurine that doesn't have the most prototypical centrosaurine feature.
Makes it a little mischievous.
Yeah, exactly. So what these authors did is they defined centrosaurines as round-nosed, relatively short-frilled ceratopsians.
Okay.
And that includes Lokiceratops as well as Styracosaurus, for example, is another famous centrosaurine. Although Styracosaurus does have a pretty prominent horn on its nose. Then for completion, they called chasmosaurines, the ones like Triceratops that usually have the long brow horns and the shorter nose horn in the traditional definition, they redefined it as long-nosed and long-frilled. So sort of a stretched out head, you could think of it as. And Triceratops does have an incredibly long head, especially compared to a lot of the centrosaurs.
Yes. What's it, like a third the size of its body?
Yeah, and like approaching 10 feet or so.
Yeah.
A huge head. I remember at the Museum of the Rockies, John Scannella pointed out to us that they're quote-unquote adult Triceratops, which is known as some as Torosaurus, but that its head was basically the size of a small car, which is just unbelievably huge. But that's the chasmosaurs. Lokiceratops is a centrosaur, which tend to have the smaller frills. In terms of the name, for Lokiceratops, it, quote, refers to the god Loki from Norse mythology, and ceratops, Greek, meaning horned face. So they didn't give a whole lot of details into why they chose Loki, other than the fact that it's the god from Norse mythology.
Maybe they're fans.
I guess, yeah. So, yeah, that's the official reason, but there are several unofficial reasons floating around for why Loki was chosen. The most obvious is that Lokiceratops has horns, and Loki also has horns in some depictions. So it could just be as simple as having horns like Loki, basically. Another possibility is that it's recognizing the partnership between the US and Denmark, because Denmark is part of Scandinavia, where Loki folklore comes from.
But except Loki's Norse, so it's a little different.
Yeah. It's not usually in Denmark. I couldn't find a ton of references to Loki in Denmark, but they do have their own spelling of it, so it is at least partially in their heritage. And then another possibility is that the fossil is a little tricksy because there is some Triceratops Torosaurus-like debate around it.
It's causing some mischief.
Yeah, exactly. So those are all possibilities, but none of those are official because the paper just says Loki, like Loki, in Norse mythology.
Also popular in Disney.
Yes. No mention of Disney was involved either. Then the species name is Rangiformis, and that refers to the, quote, bilateral asymmetry of frill ornamentations similar to the asymmetry in antlers of the reindeer caribou genus Rangifer. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. So basically, it looks kind of like a reindeer. So they gave it a reindeer species name. So the frill ornaments, if you're wondering how they look like a reindeer, they stick out at sort of a center part hairstyle sort of look. If the frill is a giant head and the little epiossifications, the little bone bumps around the edge of the frill are the hair. That's sort of parted in the middle. And I know you're thinking center parts are out of style.
Already? But
Lokiceratops is 78 million years old, so I think it gets a pass.
It's got a timeless style.
Yeah. Are center parts back in style again, though?
They were briefly, but now maybe they're back out.
It's hard to keep up.
I'm, too old to keep up now.
So is Lokiceratops. And other Lokiceratops found its style very attractive, so that's what's really important. So these ornaments on the frill were really impressive, not just by their center part, but by the sheer size of them. So at the top of the frill, there are two small, you could call them like horns. The technical term is epiossifications. They stick basically up and towards each other, But then next to them on either side are two enormous bony growths, and they are, quote, relatively larger than any other parietal epiossification within centrosaurine, end quote. So basically the biggest growths coming out of the frill that we see in any of these sorts of dinosaurs. And it looks just like two giant curved hair pieces in a center part to me, curving up and over, sort of like parallel to the frill edge. Lokiceratops was discovered in the spring of 2019 and excavated in the fall.
Oh, so they've known about it for a while.
A little bit, yeah. It's nice that they got it all out in one season, too.
Mm-hmm.
Better than when you discover a dinosaur on the last day of a dig season and then have to come back next year.
Makes me wonder, like, what is currently getting discovered and excavated right now, and 5 years from now we'll hear the big news.
Oh, there's so much stuff, yeah. We hear whispers, but a lot of it we're not allowed to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
With Lokiceratops, they found more than just the frill, and the frill is quite complete. Sometimes with these ceratopsians, you just get a little bit of the frill, a few pieces sort of smashed up, and then you can reassemble them a little bit and get a general idea of what it looked like. But this was actually almost all of the frill. And in addition to that, they got most of the rest of the skull too, including the maxilla, which is full of teeth, and a really big, impressive beak at the front of the head.
Oh, good. The beak's the important part on how you know it's a ceratopsian.
Yeah.
Even though you might think it's the frill.
I mean, the frill can also tell you it's a ceratopsian these days.
But if we want to get technical, it's the beak.
Officially, yeah, because they're the only dinosaurs that have that type of beak. In addition to the head, though, they also got a lot of the body, which is especially rare for a ceratopsian. They got a shoulder bone, they got a vertebra from by the shoulder, they got most of the hips and about 10 sacral vertebrae from between the hips, plus a couple of tail vertebrae. But unfortunately, they didn't get any limb bones.
So you got like the top half, or if it was standing, the top half.
Yeah, a little bit. A lot of the vertebrae are missing in the middle part, but yeah, that might tell you something about how it got preserved.
That's pretty good. With ceratopsians, it's usually just the skull that's preserved. So to have anything more than that is great.
Yep. And it's a very complete skull, too. Lokiceratops was found in a place where a lot of ceratopsians are found. In the centrosaur category alone, there are 3 from the same age and place. There's Wendyceratops, Albertoceratops, and Medusaceratops. And there's also the Chasmosaur Judyceratops. All of those dinosaurs were found within about a day's walk from each other.
Wow.
Most are within about 10 kilometers or 6 miles.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's in northwestern Montana. Wendyceratops is the one that has ornaments at the top edge of its frill curved down over the front. Maybe I should say one of the ceratopsians that has that. It's a lot like Cosmoceratops, which is a slightly more recent Chasmosaurine from Utah, but I think that one's a little more famous with those sort of curled over the front. It looks like it has bangs.
It does.
I always think of the epiossifications as hair. I can't help it.
If we saw it in life and we saw the skin, you'd probably think differently.
Yeah, I think so. I think the reindeer antler thing would probably be a better comparison.
Yeah.
Albertoceratops had really broad horns. It almost reminds me of a yak or something, the way they stick out so far to the sides, the 2 horns by the eyes. And then Medusaceratops basically looks kind of like Lokiceratops, although it has smaller horns and less frill ornamentation, which is also a fair amount like Albertoceratops. So it's no surprise that Lokiceratops is probably closest relatives with Albertoceratops and Medusaceratops. The authors propose that those dinosaurs should be in a group called Albertoceratopsinae, which was restricted to a fairly small area of North America. They think that because they were found so close together and they have so many features in common, they could be an example of anagenesis, or one species evolving directly into another.
Well, that's always exciting.
Yes.
But hard to prove.
It is. And even though they said it's possible that could be the case, the authors do explicitly say there isn't enough evidence for that because the fossils are basically all the same age.
Okay.
It's like a rounding error of which one came first. So you can't show, we have these, usually the way you show anagenesis is you have a rock layer that has one species and then the next rock layer up has a different species and they're only a slight change between them and you assume, okay, this one evolved directly into the next one. With these, they're too jumbled up. And we just don't have enough data points to say that one evolved into the next. There are other scientists, though, who have thrown their hat in the ring saying it is probably anagenesis. One of them is Denver Fowler.
That makes sense because he has talked about anagenesis with other dinosaurs.
Like Triceratops and Torosaurus?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was also thinking Displetosaurus.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I guess he's big time team Anagenesis. He pointed out that Lokiceratops is very large and old, and as we know, ornamentation tends to get more impressive with age on all sorts of animals, not just dinosaurs. So that could mean that Lokiceratops is basically an older form of Medusaceratops and or Albertoceratops.
Is this where we get into the Torosaurus Triceratops vibes here?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is fairly reasonable. I mean, it's definitely a possibility because this one was quite large. The skull is about 1.7 meters or 5 feet long, and one estimate for the whole animal put it at about 22 feet or 7 meters long and weighing about 5 tons. There are also some details of like the horn cores and thing that make it look like it is a pretty old individual. So I'm not sure exactly about the others. Presumably they're smaller and therefore could have been younger forms. But again, you really need more fossils to prove anagenesis. Just depends where you fall on the spectrum, whether you think one is more likely or the other is more likely. So we had all these dinosaurs that look pretty similar in a fairly restricted area of space, but they don't think it was just physical barriers keeping the ceratopsians located in one small area of the planet. They think other ceratopsians might have limited their ability to spread out.
You stay here.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know if it was that explicit, but there were many ceratopsian species in the area, so it's possible that some of the other species were like, get away from us, you're not in our species. Basically, we're saying you stay here. So that could be basically competition between those ceratopsian species, limiting the spread, but other possibilities include, quote, climatic zones, floral composition and distribution, distributions of disease and parasites, competition with other dinosaurs, or a combination of these, end quote.
So climate and temperatures and how much it rains and things like that, but then also what kind of food they've got.
Yeah, like if they're specialized to eat a certain type of food, then maybe that would limit their ability to spread out. I don't remember ever seeing disease and parasites as a limiting factor. That's pretty interesting that maybe some of the species were better adapted to deal with different diseases and parasites so they could live in different places. But I guess that's a possibility.
Makes sense.
So Lokiceratops was found in the Judith River Formation in Montana, and it's estimated to be about 78 million years old. In general, the Judith River is Campanian, which is 77 plus or minus about 2 million years old. So about 10 million years before dinosaurs went extinct. That's the same age as the foremost Old Man and Dinosaur Park formations in Canada, but a lot of times these names are different when you go to different countries. So even though it's the same rock, it has different names depending on where you are. Lokiceratops was found near the border between the US and Canada. It was found on the Montana side. That's why it's called the Judith River Formation. But as a random side fun fact, since Sabrina's doing the fun fact, I got to squeeze one in.
I see.
Yeah. The border between Western Canada and the US has been 49 degrees north latitude since the Treaty of 1818. And before that, it was the Laurentian Divide. Laurentia is actually a paleocontinent, which is a chunk of North America, which includes Greenland. And it's basically the original North America, I should say, with most of the rocks being billions of years old. The young rocks in Laurentia are about 600 million years old.
Wow.
Which even those are over twice as old as the oldest dinosaurs. But the Laurentian Divide is a little bit north of Montana, but as you go east, it actually dips down into North Dakota and Minnesota, so it's obviously more irregular than just drawing a straight line at a parallel. The Laurentian Divide is actually a continental divide, like the Great Continental Divide. I always just thought it was called the Continental Divide. I guess there's several of them. The Laurentian Divide is similar to the Great Continental Divide in that if it rains on the north side of the divide, water goes one way, and if it rains on the south side of the divide, it goes another way. In the case of the Laurentian Divide, the north side flows to the Hudson Bay watershed, and the south side flows to the Gulf of Mexico. Not always quickly, but eventually that's where it is headed towards. The reason they picked the 49th parallel boundary was because the Laurentian Divide is pretty flat and hard to define, which was causing a lot of territory disputes with the border. So later they just selected the 49th parallel because it was pretty close to the Laurentian Divide and it was just easier to define. So that's a fun little fact about Montana, Canada, and an ancient continent.
Well done.
And it involves Lokiceratops. Either way, Lokiceratops would have been the US. I was hoping it would have switched, and then the fact could have been like, oh, Lokiceratops would be in Canada if we use this old boundary, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So,
and you stay there.
Yeah. But Lokiceratops is no longer in the US or Canada. It was actually relocated to Denmark in 2021, maybe relating to that Loki name choosing. It's at the Evolutionsmuseet. I probably mispronounced that, aka the Evolution Museum, which is part of the Nuthenborg Safari Park.
Cool. A reason for us to go to Denmark.
It is. I've never been to Denmark. I do think it's a bit of a bummer that such an important holotype is now halfway around the world from where it was found. But Lokiceratops has been on display there since March 2023, so at least it's not just filed away somewhere. I went to their museum website, and it looks like it's still on display, not surprisingly, since it's just been on display for a little over a year.
So it's been on display since before it was described.
Yeah, and on their website, it still said something like a new to be named species or something like that, because they hadn't quite updated it yet. One really cool thing is that they cast the missing pieces of the skull and then put the real fossils into it, but they did it in a way so that the fossils are removable so that they can be studied separate from the filled-in replica bones. So they took a lot of time and effort to make it available to scientists as well as available to the public to see. So if you're in or near Denmark and you're a fan of ceratopsians, it might be worth a trip because it is a very nice looking specimen. It is a little bit crushed, a little lopsided, so its center part is a little bit wonked, but...
Still sticking with the center part.
I am. But it's quite complete, so it's really cool to see. There are also replicas that were just recently on display at the Natural History Museum in Utah. They had one fossil skull as well as another fleshed out model. The pictures of it had it sort of on stands on the floor, so I'm not sure if they're making it up onto that really cool ceratopsian skull wall that they have that shows the evolution of these different skulls, like a real-life cladogram of ceratopsian skulls. It's one of the coolest dinosaur displays ever, but they have it, so it'll probably end up on that wall eventually, I would guess. So that's Lokiceratops.
Nice.
A very cool new dinosaur with some extremely impressive frill ornamentation.
And a reason to go to Denmark.
Yeah.
We'll get to the extinction news in a minute. That's kind of funny, extinction news. It's not really news that there was an extinction. But anyway, we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. And now on to the latest research around the dinosaur extinction event, the non-avian dinosaurs. So, as I mentioned before, the asteroid killed off the non-avian dinosaurs, but volcanic eruptions may have set the stage for their mass extinction. So we're going back to the debate on what killed the dinosaurs. This was published by Sarah Caligaro and others in Science Advances and Open Access. If anybody wants to read it, they'll be in our show notes. So the asteroid's only part of the story, and another part is these massive volcanic eruptions. So it could be that the Deccan traps, which we've talked about a lot, and which used to be thought to be the reason that dinosaurs went extinct, they changed the climate enough that it set the stage to wipe out the non-avian dinosaurs. As the authors wrote, it was repeatedly, quote, deteriorating environmental conditions by forcing recurring short volcanic winters during the about 0.4 million years before the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, end quote. So these volcanic eruptions are happening in the 400,000 years before the dinosaurs went extinct, and they caused a lot of short volcanic winters, which was not great when the asteroid hit. It kind of weakened them and set the stage for this mass extinction. That's because of the sulfur and the fluorine that got ejected into the atmosphere from the eruptions. Fluorine's reactive, and it can cause severe burns. It looks like a pale yellow gas. Sulfur is also pale yellow. Uh, that one, though, it's often used in things like matches.
Yeah, I think specifically from volcanoes, though, you get like sulfur dioxide, which goes into the upper atmosphere and reflects a lot of the sunlight to cool things down.
So what the authors did was they developed a new technique to estimate how much sulfur and fluorine was released into the atmosphere, and they could measure it in rock samples
Huh.
because some of them would have been trapped as they cooled after a volcanic eruption.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So they were able to estimate the amounts of both sulfur and fluorine in about the 200,000 years before the KPG event, extinction. They found that there was this warming phase that peaked about 200,000 years before the non-avian dinosaurs died out. And then there was this global cooling that ended around the time that they died out. There was this just steady drop in temperature. The sulfur could have triggered a volcanic winter, the global drop in temperature. Then it could be that there were these volcanic winters that lasted decades before the dinosaurs died out, which would mean a lot of instability because that would have been hard on plants and animals. So, just summing it all up, some big environmental changes starting in the late Cretaceous, then ramped up until the KPG extinction happened. And before the extinction event, there were these warming and cooling trends, which might have been due to or influenced by the Deccan Traps volcanism. And all of these changes together just made things really unstable and possibly contributed to the non-avian dinosaurs' demise when the asteroid hit.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were just kind of in a more vulnerable place.
Yeah, I know we've covered articles like this before where they talk about it was the 1-2 punch of the Deccan Traps volcanism and the asteroid. And then we've seen other people who have said, because the timing of the Deccan Traps is pretty hard to nail down really precisely compared to the asteroid impact, that maybe a lot of the Deccan Trap eruptions was caused by the impact, like almost like, breaking a water balloon or something, where it hit the asteroid on one side and it caused eruptions on the other side, because the Deccan Traps are almost on the opposite side of the Earth from where the Chicxulub impact hit. But it is interesting to think that maybe they were weakened a little bit. The tricky thing is that we don't really see it on that time scale when it comes to like species level stuff, because we just don't have that precision with species. So we can't really tell, like, were there fewer T-Rex walking around 200,000 years before the extinction compared to 600,000 years before the extinction, because you just don't get that kind of data in the fossil record.
Right. I also wonder how that compares to the papers we talked about that found that in certain parts of the world, there was a lot of dinosaur diversity still.
Yeah, exactly. And I always, when I hear this stuff, sulfur dioxide, like you were saying, it affects a winter-like climate if it's a really big eruption on the order of years to maybe decades. But when our error bars on when these eruptions are happening is like 200,000 years, like, could you imagine if there was a big volcanic eruption 200,000 years ago and people were blaming it for stuff that was going on today? Like,
Oh, that's not exactly what they said. They were just able to figure out this happened around 200,000 years ago, the peak warming, and then past that started cooling down.
yeah, but the amount of cooling and how close it was to 66 million years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct is just really hard to hit. But if there was a huge eruption that same year or a few years before the Chicxulub impactor hit, that would make perfect sense that it caused a big problem. But if it was hundreds of thousands of years earlier, then maybe not. Maybe we'll get more refined estimates in the future and can nail it down a little bit better.
Yeah. But speaking of the Chicxulub impact, that brings me to the next paper, which is about how dust from the asteroid may have been the biggest factor in the non-avian dinosaurs going extinct.
Yeah.
This was published by Ken Barksdale and others in Nature Geoscience. So it's another case of, like, yes, the asteroid hit and it had all of these terrible effects right after, but there's more to it than that even. Yeah.
More than just a giant fireball, you mean?
Yeah, you gotta kind of zone in. There's a lot of fine dust that was ejected into the atmosphere after it hit, which that's not surprising, but it turns out that that may have had a bigger impact than we thought. Bigger impact than the impact. Well, I guess it's all related. But it seems that This dust blocked out the sun for almost 2 years. That's according to the team's simulation. Well, they said 1.7 years or 620 days after the impact.
Oh, that's precise.
Yes. And because the sun was being blocked out, that would mean that plants couldn't photosynthesize. And photosynthesis, just quick reminder, that's when plants make oxygen and energy using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. And not being able to do that would have made it really hard for life on Earth and would have caused a whole chain reaction.
Yeah, especially when you combine it with the temperature change,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of ability to photosynthesize.
So this team, they used data from past studies as well as data from sediment samples taken from the Tanis fossil site in North Dakota from the 20 years after the asteroid hit to make a computer model and then simulate Earth's climate after the asteroid. And they've learned a lot. Well, not just them, but a lot of scientists have learned a lot from this site, like how it probably happened in springtime when the crater hit, as well as details of what happened that day. And we've gone over that in detail ourselves. It sounded terrible.
There's a really good documentary with David Attenborough where they're going over what exactly they think happened with tsunamis in addition to forest fires and everything else.
There was just nowhere to go that was safe. But anyway, the dust. The samples included dust. There's 3 types of fine dust: sulfur, soot particles, and silicate dust particles, which are often found in stone, rock, sand, gravel, and clay. And other things got ejected into the atmosphere too, like carbon dioxide, water vapor, and methane, which also played a big role in the mass extinction. But these lasted longer, like thousands to tens of thousands of years. So that is different compared to the dust, which only was lasting for about a few years in the atmosphere. So the question then is, like, what were the dust's short-term effects on the climate? And they wrote, quote, "Our simulations indicate that both sulfur and silicate dust have a prominent influence on the surface thermal forcing, leading to a prolonged impact winter up to about 20 years, in which the first 5 to 8 years are the most severe," end quote.
Yeah, that's different than some earlier studies we've talked about, because we've talked about when they look at just the dust, for example, and they've had the same thing where they say like maybe up to 20 years. But to think about, well, methane has this effect, but the methane dies off after it's one of the shorter lived ones. I think that one is like 20 years, although that's on the warming side, so it's extra complicated. Then the sulfur dioxide also has a cooling effect, but that has a different timing. So you have to stack together all of these different effects and different time scales for how long they're affecting the climate.
Right.
And it's interesting that it was the coolest at first, and then it sort of slowly got less and less.
Right. Yeah, so they found that fine dust may have been in the atmosphere for up to 15 years. The global climate may have cooled as much as 15 degrees Celsius.
What? That's absurd.
Terrible. And the amount of sulfur particles in the atmosphere decreased faster. Silicate dust had the biggest impact. So again, yeah, blocking out the sun for a couple years, no photosynthesis. They did say that photosynthesis recovered maybe 3 to 4 years after impact. But again, there was the nearly 2 years where there was none happening.
And it might have been limited too, especially if it was that cold, then not a lot of plants can live in those conditions.
Right. And then that would mean that animals and plants that could go into a dormant phase, either through seeds or they hibernate in burrows as examples, they could adapt and they would have done better at surviving compared to those that couldn't and they died out. And then also based on the model, it seems that the southern hemisphere recovered earlier than the northern hemisphere, which we've talked about from previous studies too. And it makes sense since the crater or the asteroid hit in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah. I never thought about the different types of dust before.
Or even the effect that dust can have, something so small in large quantities.
Yeah, it has been a while since we talked about that.
Which brings me to the next news item, which is about how studying fossils can help us understand both the deep past and help us predict our future, and how vulnerable are we to going extinct. There was a feature in The Guardian that covered this a bit. How did life on Earth react to climate change and adapt in the past? And it's a good feature. It'll be in our show notes if you want to read the whole thing. Just kind of pulling out bits and pieces. So I talked about how paleontologist Jasmina Wyman studies fossilized organic matter and uses lasers to study fossils. And from that, you can learn whether an animal was endothermic or ectothermic, very basic terms, warm or cold-blooded, Being endothermic and regulating body temperature is an advantage because you can regulate in a changing climate. And they found that many animals evolved being warm-blooded after extinction events, like after the Permian Triassic and the Cretaceous Paleogene. There was also a study earlier this year by Cooper Malinowski and others that looked at almost 300,000 marine invertebrate fossils from the past 485 million years and reconstructed the climate over that time. They were looking if there were certain traits like body size or geographic range that were important in predicting extinction. And they found that range size, like moving at larger distances and being more widely spread, was helpful, which makes sense.
Yeah, if you can go farther to search for food, that's a big advantage. Whereas if you're stuck in one place.
And there were some other traits important at predicting extinction, but if climate change was really big, animals with traits that make them less likely to go extinct will still go extinct. So that's a bit of a bummer.
But basically, they're just saying like nothing's immune.
Yes.
If there's a big enough effect size, then it'll get to everything.
Right. Like if there's no photosynthesis for 2 years or something along those lines. Some things that are helpful for us now, though, is that we're not a supercontinent. So the climate regulates better. And, we're not in the supercontinent, so the middle isn't so hot and dry. But our resources are limited. So just things to keep in mind and a friendly reminder of why it's helpful to study paleontology.
Yep, has modern applications.
Our last news item, we're going to end on a higher note. It's that you can help name a sauropod at the Los Angeles County Natural History Museum. It's a 70-foot-long skeleton Jurassic sauropod that was found between 2007 and 2019. Ooh, so they finished the same year as Lokiceratops, but it took them a few more years.
Yeah, it started a lot earlier.
It's a new species similar to Diplodocus. It's going to be named in the future. They've got about 350 fossils from 6 individuals that's going to make the skeleton. So it sounds fairly complete. It's going to go to the center of the Welcome Center, which is currently under construction. But that'll open this fall, and there'll be gardens and outdoor plaza at a 400-seat theater.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we definitely need to go and see this. The bones, they washed into a river after the dinosaurs died. What's really cool is that the fossils are emerald green. That's just how they fossilized.
The only one I've seen like that was at Lightning Ridge in Australia with the opal dinosaurs. We saw a green one there too.
Yeah, so this will be really cool to see. And the museum staff nicknamed the dinosaur Natalie with a G to refer to all the gnats at the dig site.
That's pretty bad.
But anyway, they've got an online poll to choose one of 5 names for the dinosaur. These are preset names because they don't want a Bodie McBoatface situation.
Okay. So these aren't for the official name. These are for the nickname
of this composite of 6 individuals that are making the skeleton.
Gotcha. So they're looking for a replacement for Natalie.
Yeah, well, Natalie's one of the options. So.
Okay.
There's also sage, which is a green LA native plant. Verde, which means green. Esme, which is short for Esmeralda, and that's the Spanish word for emerald. And olive, which is a symbol of peace, and olive trees are green. So you see a pattern here.
It has to be named after green, is what they're saying. Or gnats.
Or gnats, yeah.
I feel like they're trying to split the vote here. They really want it to stay Natalie, so they give one that's not a green, and then all the green fans are going to split between the other votes.
Maybe. We'll see what happens when the voting opens. I don't actually know when that'll start. We'll get on to our dinosaur of the day in just a moment. Pampadromaeus, a sauropodomorph from the Triassic. But first, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Pampadromaeus, which was a request from Paul B. via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. Another one of the perks if you become a Dino-it-all. Pampadromaeus was a basal sauropodomorph that lived in the Late Triassic, about 230 to 228 million years ago, in what is now Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil, in the Santa Maria Formation. As an early dinosaur, looked like other early dinosaurs, like both theropods and sauropodomorphs.
Yeah, they had a pretty similar overall body look.
Yeah, they were small, they walked on 2 legs, they had short arms and a long tail. Pampadromaeus is estimated to be about 1.5 meters, or almost 5 feet long. It was hard to classify at first because of its mix of features. It had a mix of basal and derived traits, both older and newer traits. Basal traits included having a large skull and a short thigh bone, and it also had a mix of traits seen in sauropodomorphs and theropods. For example, it had a long, low skull similar to sauropodomorphs. Its neck was also somewhat long, but not that long. It had 88 teeth. It's a lucky number.
Yeah.
It had these long, sharp, serrated teeth and also leaf-shaped teeth in the front of the mouth, which would be good for eating plants.
It was a heterodont.
Yeah, because the different teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Its lower leg was longer than the thigh bone, so it was probably a fast runner. It didn't have air sacs in its bones, and that helps show that those air sacs or lighter bones evolved independently later. It was actually part of a study in 2022 that found that pterosaurs, theropods, and sauropodomorphs independently evolved their air sacs. Pampadromaeus was named in 2011 by Sergio Cabrera and others. The type species is Pampadromaeus barberinae. The genus name Pampadromaeus comes from Quechua, and it means plain, and it refers to the plains where the fossils were found. So the full genus name Pampadromaeus means plains runner.
Oh, okay.
And then the species name Barberinae is in honor of the Brazilian paleontologist Mario Costa Barberena. The fossils of Pampadromaeus were found in 2004. The holotype was well preserved. It was mostly in mudstone block, and some other bones were found nearby. Based on the size and how the bones were preserved, plus there were no duplicate bones, these probably all came from the same individual. The holotype includes most of the skull and lower jaws, and a partial skeleton, including vertebrae, parts of the shoulder girdle, parts of the hips, and parts of the arms and legs, as well as parts of the feet. They also found 17 tail vertebrae, or tail bones. Then later, more bones were found, including 2 nearly complete left femora, thigh bones.
Oh, so there's got to be at least 2 new dinosaurs.
Individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs in terms of individual dinosaurs, not species.
Yes. Some other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place as Pampadromaeus include sauropodomorphs like Saturnalia and Herrerasaurs like Gnathovorax. And that's with a G, like gnats, like Natalie.
G, like Gnathovorax.
Yeah.
Next time you're spelling something.
Some other animals that lived around the same time and place include amphibians, cynodonts, pseudoseuchians, archosauriforms, and silosaurs. And our fun fact, which again, that's me today.
Yeah.
It's that mammals, including humans, may age more quickly and not live as long because of dinosaurs. It's interesting how we're all connected.
Yeah, what did they do to us?
Before I get into that side fun fact, dinosaurs didn't have that long of lifespans either.
It's true. Most of the theropods we have were teenagers, basically.
I'll start with the mammal fun fact. João Pedro de Magalhães, a microbiologist, published in Bioessays, which is open access under Ideas and Speculations, this idea that dinosaurs affected how our lifespans are today. The question is, why do mammals, including humans, show their age compared to some reptiles, including many turtles and amphibians that show no significant signs of aging? And dinosaurs could be to blame. There was one headline about this that said dinosaurs might be the reason we're not living to 200 years old.
Interesting. I'm a little skeptical.
It's kind of like a thought experiment, I would say. The idea is when dinosaurs dominated Earth, mammals were small and nocturnal and lived short lives. And it could be that this evolutionary pressure for millions of years, or more than 100 million years, to reproduce early, because mammals were living short lives, might have led to losing genes or genes being inactive that would have helped with long life. So it's called the longevity bottleneck hypothesis. And the idea is maybe mammals, including humans, can live long lives, but, quote, they do so under constraints dating to the dinosaur era. It was inspired by the nocturnal bottleneck hypothesis, which is about, because, mammals used to be
pretty much all
nocturnal, yeah. And the idea with the longevity bottleneck hypothesis is that modern mammals age more rapidly and obviously than reptiles, birds, or amphibians because of our evolutionary history during the dinosaurs' reign. There are some fast-aging species of reptiles, birds, and amphibians, and of course mammals, but the slowest aging species are non-mammals. And even humans who do live a long time still age fairly fast. And some humans do live a long time, like over 100 years. For example, I have an uncle who is 102
Yeah,
and still going strong.
exactly almost 100 years older than our daughter, which is so fun.
Yeah. But there's some reptiles and amphibians that have no significant signs of aging, and all mammals have signs of aging. Reptiles and amphibians have traits like limb regeneration or continuous tooth replacement. There you go, Garrett. And cancer resistance. And mammals lost these types of traits or processes, like we only have the 2 sets of teeth. Cancer is also more frequent in mammals than other species. There are cases of cancer in reptiles and amphibians, and the author did say we need more studies on this aspect. Mammals also have reproductive senescence, which is the gradual process of declining fertility. So he proposed that the lost traits happened in the ancestral lineage leading to modern mammals, but it may have happened in all early mammals. There's some other possible contributors, like being endotherms and regulating our own body temperatures. Like maybe that contributes to shorter lifespans, which would be interesting if that could help us from going extinct, but also might make our lifespan thoughts there. This all brings me to my side fun fact that dinosaurs didn't typically have long lifespans themselves. There was an interesting article in Live Science that was, what was the typical lifespan of a dinosaur? And it seems that in a lot of cases, dinosaurs lived fast and died young, so they had their own constraints as well. The bigger dinosaurs tended to live longer than the smaller ones. We see this in modern animals too, like some elephants live up to 70 years, some whales up to 200 years. Which I just realized those are examples of mammals living a long time.
Yeah.
Some sauropods live to around 60 years old. We know this through the lags, the lines of arrested growth, which you can see when you slice into bone and count them, like tree rings. Some smaller dinosaurs, like Styracosaurus, which is a small troodontid, grew quickly and then reached adult size in 3 to 5 years, and then it probably didn't live much longer after. That's not always the case, though. For example, Sue the T-Rex lived about 28 years, which also isn't that long, but longer than 5 years.
Yeah, and some of the Belosaurs lived quite a bit longer too, like into their 40s, 50s.
Yeah. But why did dinosaurs seem to have these short lifespans? Well, it could be because some were partially warm-blooded and they had fast metabolisms. It could be that they reproduced quickly. They had the clutches of eggs at a time, so they didn't need to live as long, compared to, say, elephants and whales that take longer to reproduce, so having longer lifespans for them is more useful. But on the other hand, Galapagos tortoises lay clutches of eggs and also live a long time, like into the triple digits, so it's all a mystery.
Yes. Yeah, why some animals live a long time and other animals don't is a subject of much debate.
Yes.
I remember way back in the day, there used to be a hypothesis that it had to do with the number of heartbeats. So they would say like, well, an animal only gets so many heartbeats. And they thought like exercising them would be a problem and would reduce your lifespan because you're using up those heartbeats. But then they found actually it's good to exercise your heart a little bit and keep it in better shape so it actually can increase your lifespan. But there is this correlation with animals that have really high metabolisms like hummingbirds and stuff, and their heart is going absolutely nuts at like 1,000 beats per minute. Compared to animals that have a really low metabolism, some of them do tend to live longer. But the in-between is so complicated because we're just big old vats of chemistry and all
Yes.
sorts of different processes going on in our bodies that it's really difficult to figure out.
It's even more complicated when you bring in prehistoric animals that are been long extinct.
Yeah, and how would you ever figure out why they lived as long as they did when all you have is bones? That's
Yeah.
especially difficult.
We barely know why some humans make it to 100 and others don't.
Yes. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned. Next week, we'll have another new Dromaeosaur as well as additional dinosaur news. And thank you to everyone who is part of our Dino It All community. If you want to join and get perks like connecting with other dinosaur enthusiasts and requesting our dinosaur of the day and ad-free episodes, as well as a lot of other perks, then head on over and join at patreon.com/iknowdino.
And if you join before next week, you'll be all ready to go for the extra bonus questions in our trivia game.
Yes. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Good day.